To the Supreme Caesar, Emperor Tiberius, your humblest servant in the province of Judea, Pontius Pilate. I write this letter on this parchment scroll with a mixture of awe, bewilderment, and profound uneasiness. This is not your typical provincial report. It concerns tax increases and decreases, the movement of regiments, or the occasional local rebellion. What I am about to recount is a momentous event that has shaken my entire worldview and made me question the very foundations of the order and logic we so proudly establish in Rome. I implore you to read this letter in the most private of circumstances, for the people and events it touches are far beyond the experience of us all. I must record it not only for the official records of the Roman Empire, but also to find some peace of mind for my tormented, sleepless conscience. The central figure in this incident was a Nazarene named Jesus, and you, my sovereign Lord, are perhaps as curious as I am. What exactly did this man look like who, in just 3 years, had so convulsed the entire Jewish region, causing the high priests and elders of the Sanhedrin to fear the threat of their own destruction and to terrify them, and had tens of thousands of people alternately following him with rapt attention, listening to his unheard-of teachings, and then hysterically clamoring for his crucifixion. In the official trial records submitted to Rome, I described his appearance in a few words: a Jewish man of about 30. This is, of course, an indisputable fact, but, Caesar, it is also the greatest lie I can imagine. Any attempt to describe his true appearance with our mundane language ultimately pales in comparison, almost to the point of being a form of blasphemy. During my years as governor of Judea, I interrogated hundreds of prisoners. I met bandits with fierce eyes and blood-stained hands, con men with sweet words and cunning minds, and zealots blinded by fanatical faith and ready to launch suicide attacks. Their faces ranged from brutality to cowardice, and from deep-seated ignorance. I could easily read their true thoughts from their eyes, expressions, and body language. But Jesus was different. He was an exception who broke all the rules. When my soldiers first brought him to my governor's palace, Jerusalem was in the throes of the Passover Eve frenzy. The streets of the holy city were thronged with pilgrims pouring in from every direction. The air was thick with the stench of sacrificial blood, the sweet aroma of spices, and the sweat of the thronging masses a pungent, unsettling blend. High priest Caiaphas and his father-in-law, the former high priest Annas, represented the Sanhedrin, shouting loudly outside the courtyard. Their faces were a mixture of deep hatred and triumph, as if they had already pronounced the man's death before the trial even began. Jesus, however, stood quietly in the center of the clamor. He wore an ordinary, seamless robe made of the coarse linen common in Galilee, besmeared with dust and sweat from a night of travel, interrogation, and humiliation. His hands were bound behind his back with rough ropes, and his brown hair and neatly trimmed beard were a bit disheveled. From his appearance alone, he looked like an ordinary Galilean carpenter, a man who toiled under the scorching sun. He was of medium build, neither the bulky German barbarians nor the gaunt and frail sages of some Eastern philosophers. His skin was a healthy bronze, the result of years of exposure to the sun on the shores of Lake Galilee and the hills of Judea. His muscles were firm and well-proportioned, the product of years of hard work. Yet, when I truly laid eyes on his face, for the first time in my life, I felt an indescribable bewilderment. I couldn't define him with the words we usually use, handsome or ugly. His features were nothing special, neither the golden proportions of an Apollo sculpture nor any singular, striking features. His nose was straight and strong, his lips softly defined but with an unmistakable firmness. His broad forehead hinted at a deep, pensive air. Everything seemed ordinary, a face you might encounter in any Jewish village. Yet it was precisely this profound ordinariness, when combined, that created a strange power that was impossible to ignore, even to gaze upon. The true secret lay not in his features, but in his eyes. Caesar, I have had the privilege of looking into your eyes, filled with all-seeing majesty and the power to rule the world. I have also seen the eyes of the empire's most formidable centurions, as sharp as an eagle, capable of piercing through the ranks of the enemy. But I swear to you, I have never seen eyes like those of Jesus. Those eyes, as deep as the midnight Mediterranean, seem to hold the secrets of the universe's origin and end. When he looked at you, you didn't feel like you were being scrutinized by a prisoner. You felt completely and unreservedly understood. That gaze easily penetrated my ornate proconsul's robes, the pride and apathy I maintained as a Roman official, reaching the deepest corners of my soul, places I was ashamed to even touch. Beneath that gaze lay all my pretenses, political calculations, and inner insecurities. It wasn't a gaze of condescending judgment, but one filled with boundless compassion. He seemed to already know everything about me, my ambitions, my fears, my weaknesses, and my struggles. Yet, he didn't despise me for that. Instead, his eyes revealed a love and sorrow so profound it was heartbreaking. In that instant, the clamor of accusations, vicious curses, and frenzied shouts outside the courtyard seemed to vanish. In my world, there were only me and him, the governor representing the most powerful empire on earth, and a powerless prisoner bound in chains. In absolute silence, I heard the beat of my own heart, to break the suffocating silence, to reclaim control. I asked him the crucial question in as calm a voice as possible. Are you the king of the Jews? It was a carefully crafted political question, a deadly trap. Any affirmative answer would constitute treason against the Roman Empire, and I could execute him on the spot. I expected him to vehemently deny it like the other zealots, or to evade it with the cunning rhetoric of a Jewish rabbi. But he did neither. He simply looked at me calmly and answered my question with a question. Did you say this yourself, or did others say it to you about me? His voice, too, was unexpected. It wasn't the impassioned rhetoric of an orator, nor the indignant roar of a rebel. His voice was gentle and clear, yet it held a strange resonance, as if it emanated not from his throat but from the depths of his broad chest, perhaps even from the very earth beneath his feet. Every word was imbued with power, not an oppressive force, but a force that compelled one to stop and listen, a force that belonged to the truth itself. My heart was profoundly shaken. I, Pontius Pilate, a governor representing the supreme authority of the Roman Empire, felt unprecedentedly insignificant and humbled before a ragged prisoner. I replied, somewhat angrily, am I a Jew, your own people, and the chief priests handed you over to me? What have you done? His next words left me in a state of confusion, as if I had touched a dimension completely unfamiliar to me. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have fought to prevent me from being handed over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not of this world. Caesar, these words, like an invisible hammer, hammered down upon my understanding. We Romans, what did we rely on to conquer the world and establish order? It was our invincible legions, our rigorous laws, our sturdy roads that stretched everywhere. Our kingdom was this tangible, visible, and tangible world. And yet, he, an unarmed carpenter unable even to protect himself, was talking about another kingdom. At that moment, I looked at his face again. That ordinary face, radiant with an indescribable, holy light, was lit up by these words. He wasn't spouting nonsense, nor was he engaging in a philosophical debate. He was stating a fact he firmly believed, a fact he'd personally lived through. His expression was so solemn, so certain, that in that moment, I almost believed him. This force compelled me to ask, so you are a king? He gave a response that both affirmed and transcended my question. You are. For this reason I was born, and for this reason I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Those who belong to the truth listen to my voice. Truth in Roman courts, we only considered evidence and legal text. Truth was just an ethereal term debated endlessly by Greek philosophers beneath the columns of the Forum. With a touch of Roman pragmatism and a touch of genuine curiosity, I blurted out the question that would haunt me for the rest of my life. What is truth? He didn't answer. He simply stared at me in silence, the pity in his eyes deepening, as if he felt pity for a child who could never understand the answer. It took me a long time to slowly understand that it wasn't that he couldn't answer, but that he himself was the answer. Truth is not an abstract concept, but a concrete person. He was the truth he spoke of. And I, the Roman governor, stood before the truth, asked it, "What are you?" and then passed it by. I found no guilt in him. I questioned him repeatedly, even personally examining the so-called evidence, only to discover that it was riddled with contradictions and fabrications. He hadn't organized a rebellion or incited violence. His words about the kingdom of heaven, eternal life, and loving your enemies, though they sounded bizarre and even timid to us Romans, did not constitute a capital offense under any Roman law. So, 3 times, I ascended the balcony of the Praetorian Palace and loudly declared to the frenzied crowd outside the courtyard that I could find no guilt in this man. I even considered using the customary Passover release of a prisoner to save him. I pitted him against another prisoner, a notorious robber and murderer named Barabbas, and asked the crowd to choose. Barabbas was the true rebel threatening Roman rule, and a hero many of them secretly worshipped. I assumed that any reasonable person would choose to release this gentle teacher whose words were merely peculiar over a murder whose hands were stained with blood. But I was wrong. I completely underestimated the irrationality of the crowd, fueled by religious fanaticism and political demagoguery. I watched the chief priests and scribes weave through the crowd like serpents, stirring them with vicious words and ancient hatreds. Then I heard the most terrifying and incomprehensible cries of my life. Like a roar from hell, they combined into a terrifying wave that crashed down upon my governor's palace. "Crucify him! Crucify him! Release Barabbas to us!" They preferred a murder to this man who claimed to bring the truth. As I hesitated, my wife sent a note. "Have nothing to do with this righteous man, for I suffered much today in a dream for him." This further upset me, as I knew my wife's dreams could sometimes carry ominous omens. To quell the riot, which threatened to spiral out of control, and to preserve my position, I made a decision I would forever regret. I ordered the soldiers to scourge him. The Roman scourging was brutal. The 9-tailed whip was studded with sharp lead and broken bones, and each blow ripped flesh apart, leaving a back like a plowed field. Deep down I still held onto a glimmer of hope, hoping that his bloody appearance would evoke a glimmer of sympathy from the people, satisfying their bloodlust and allowing them to spare him. When the soldiers brought him back to me, his condition was horrific. Barely a single piece of skin remained intact on his back, and blood soaked through the cheap purple costume the soldiers had dressed him in for mockery. They had also woven a crude crown of thorns common outside Jerusalem, and forced it onto his head. The long spikes dug deep into his scalp, and blood trickled down his cheeks, mingling with the sweat from his forehead and the spit of the enemies. But, Caesar, please believe every word I say next, for it is the most shocking and paradoxical sight I have ever witnessed. It was at that moment, when I presented him to the frenzied crowd, and exclaimed, "Behold, the man," that I truly saw his face for the first time. The true face of Jesus, tortured beyond all resemblance, was fully revealed to me in that moment. On that face, stained with blood, spittle, and filth, I saw not a trace of pain, hatred, or despair. His eyes remained as clear and calm as when I first met him, filled with a divine compassion that transcended all human suffering. The crown of thorns, meant to humiliate him, now took on a strange, heartbreaking majesty, as if it were the only true, meaningful crown in the world. His shed blood seemed not the mark of a loser's shame, but rather a sacred and solemn cleansing ceremony for a tainted world. His once ordinary features, in the midst of utter suffering, seemed sculpted by an invisible master, now radiating an indescribable divine radiance. At that moment, he was no longer a mortal. His appearance transcended all human categories. I seemed to behold a god, willing to endure the deepest humiliation and the most intense pain for the sake of the world he deeply loved, yet so foolish. His silence was more powerful than any horse defense. His scars were more authoritative than any emperor's scepter. I was completely shocked. My inner defenses completely collapsed in that moment. I really wanted to release him at all costs. But the roar outside the court became more fierce, and they shouted the words that finally broke me. If you release this man, you are not a loyal subject of Caesar. Whoever claims to be a king rebels against Caesar. These words, like a poisonous arrow, hit me sorely. As a Roman official, my loyalty to you, Caesar, is my bounden duty and the cornerstone of maintaining all my power and status. I cannot gamble my political future on a mysterious Galilean, or even trigger an uncontrollable riot during the sensitive period of Passover. My reason, or rather my cowardice, ultimately triumphed over my conscience. I asked someone to bring a basin of water, washed my hands in front of everyone, and said in a tone that was almost self-hypnotic, "The blood of this righteous man is innocent of me, you bear it." I know what a cowardly and hypocritical act this was. Clean water can wash away the filth on my hands, but it can never wash away the guilt deep in my soul. I personally handed over a man who I knew was innocent, and even vaguely felt in my heart that he was far superior to ordinary people, to the mob that was thirsty for his blood. I did not witness his crucifixion with my own eyes. That was not the occasion for me as governor. But I heard everything that happened afterwards from the report of the centurion in charge of the execution. My centurion, a man who had been through many battles, and whose heart was as hard as Roman stone, his voice trembled when he reported to me. He said that when Jesus was nailed to the cross and suffered great pain, he actually prayed for those who crucified him and mocked him, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." In extreme pain, he even entrusted his mother to one of his beloved disciples. Then, the most incredible thing happened. According to the centurion's report, and confirmation from many parties in the city, darkness covered the entire land from noon, the 6th hour, to the 9th hour, the 9th hour. It was not an ordinary solar eclipse, Caesar, but a suffocating darkness full of ominous signs, as if the entire universe was mourning the death of this man. When he took his last breath and uttered the word, "It is finished," the earth shook violently, and even the stone pillars of the governor's palace were shaking. Even more shocking was that the huge and extremely thick curtain that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies in the temple was torn in half from top to bottom without any human intervention. Even the centurion in charge of the execution could not suppress his inner fear and shouted in public, "This is truly the Son of God. Caesar, it's not over yet." His death was even more stirring than his life. One of his followers, Joseph, a counselor of Arimathea, a man we Romans would consider a high-ranking gentry, boldly came to me before sunset and asked for Jesus' body. This required tremendous courage, for touching the body of a crucified sinner would have been both religiously and politically defiled. Feeling strangely weary, I agreed. They wrapped his body in clean linen and placed it in a new unused tomb, blocking the entrance with a huge round stone. The next day, the Sabbath, the high priests and Pharisees, who had previously been clamoring for his crucifixion, once again came to me in panic. They said that Jesus had arrogantly predicted that he would be resurrected 3 days after his death. They asked me to send a detachment of Roman soldiers to guard the tomb to prevent his disciples from stealing the body during the night, and then falsely claiming he had risen from the dead to the ignorant masses. I was fed up with the internal strife among the Jews, So I unhappily gave them permission to do their best to guard the tomb. Not only did they send our Roman soldiers, they also put the seal of the Sanhedrin on the huge stone. However, 3 days later, on the first day of the week, at dawn a greater commotion broke out. The soldiers guarding the tomb, the Roman soldiers, who never once frowned on the battlefield, fled back to the city in utter terror, reporting to the high priests a devastating event. At dawn, a violent earthquake struck. An angel, with features as bright as lightning and clothing as white as snow, descended from heaven. He effortlessly rolled open the tomb door, which required several men to push, and sat on it. These battle-hardened guards, terrified by the unbearable glory, were as dead as death, and the tomb was empty. Jesus' body was gone, leaving only the linen wrappings and the turban, which was neatly folded and placed elsewhere. The high priest's first reaction was not to investigate the true nature of this supernatural event, but to bribe the terrified soldiers with large sums of money to spread a fabricated rumor. His disciples had stolen the body while the Roman soldiers were asleep. Caesar, what a ridiculous lie! An entire company of Roman soldiers fell asleep while carrying out such an important guard duty. If this were true, they would have been executed according to military law. Furthermore, if the disciples had risked stealing the body in a panic, how could they have had the time and inclination to calmly remove the tightly wrapped grave clothes and turban and fold the turban neatly? From that day on, the news of Jesus' resurrection spread like wildfire throughout Jerusalem and Judea with an unstoppable force. His disciples, the cowardly fishermen and tax collectors who had fled in terror at his arrest, suddenly seemed reborn fearless. They openly proclaimed in the temple porches and in the busiest streets that Jesus had conquered death and risen from the dead. They testified everywhere that the risen Jesus had appeared to them many times, spoken to them, explained Scripture to them, and even ate with them. They were no longer a sad, depressed, hidden group. They had become a new force that no force could suppress. Scourging, imprisonment, or the threat of death could silence them. I secretly sent someone to investigate further, and I found the transformation of these disciples to be genuine and credible. No one would calmly face suffering and death for a carefully crafted lie. The fire burning in their eyes, the unwavering joy and inner peace, reminded me of the look in Jesus' eyes as he stood before me on trial. So, my most high Caesar, let me return to the original question of this letter. What was Jesus' true appearance? Having written this, after all I've experienced, I can finally offer a definitive answer. His true appearance wasn't his ordinary features, nor was it the ordinary body of a Galilean carpenter. His true appearance was his piercing serenity before the judgment seat, his extraordinary endurance under the scourge, his prayer for forgiveness for his enemies on the cross, his supreme authority in the face of death, and the glory of his empty tomb, a glory that even death couldn't contain. His appearance was a presence that profoundly transformed all who encountered it. He made a battle-hardened Roman centurion sincerely confess that he was the Son of God. He turned a group of cowardly and ignorant disciples into fearless martyrs. He also made me, a self-righteous Roman governor, live in eternal torment of conscience. I dream of his eyes every night. Sometimes those eyes look at me with endless compassion in the courtyard of the governor's palace. Sometimes they look at the sky in agony on the hill of Golgotha in the darkness. I washed my hands, but my soul felt more filthy than ever. I used what I thought was a wise political method to maintain temporary order in a remote province of Rome. But it felt like I had personally destroyed something greater and more eternal than the entire Roman Empire. This Nazarene named Jesus, his kingdom is indeed not of this world, but his influence has begun to permeate and change the world in a way that we cannot understand or resist. I don't know where his followers will eventually go, and I don't know what this belief in resurrection will bring to the Roman Empire in the future. I can faithfully record what I have seen, heard, and felt, sealed in this top-secret archive, and present it to you, my most high Caesar. Perhaps, centuries from now, the splendor of our Rome will become a passing cloud in the pens of historians, and your great name, Caesar, will be recorded in the annals of history by only a few. But I have a strong and terrifying premonition that the name of Jesus, the carpenter of Nazareth, and his face, radiant with divine splendor amidst the depths of his suffering, will be praised and worshipped by billions of people of all races and languages until the end of the world. I have finished my words. Please decide the value of this report. I remain your loyal servant, but my heart can no longer return to the calm, confident Pilate who believed only in power and might before the trial of Jesus. Your humble servant, Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem. What we share today is not a single, unearthed archaeological document, but a profound imagination and reconstruction based on the biblical account. What kind of inner turmoil did Pilate, a Roman official who played a pivotal role at the crossroads of history and faith, endure? Through his perspective, we may be able to re-examine that moment that determined the course of human history 2,000 years ago. The Bible never describes Jesus' appearance in detail, and perhaps this is precisely its most profound wisdom. For true divinity cannot be defined by any human words. It's not about handsome features, but about the love, truth, and sacrifice that transcend time and space and touch the soul. Pilate may have washed his hands, but he could never erase the imprint of this sacred encounter. And each of us who reads this story often finds ourselves standing before the governor's palace of our own lives, facing difficult choices between profit and conscience, between the mundane and the true. If today's sharing has given you a new understanding of this familiar story, or touched a corner of your heart, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. More importantly, please share this insight with those around you, so that more people can have the opportunity to gaze through the dust of history at the face that changed the world.